A business school has to be about more than just business these days, especially when it comes to exploring new markets. All the market potential in the world isn't going to do anyone any good if the area, for example, is disease-ridden. Well, that is exactly what exists today in Tanzania, where tuberculosis is rampant, even though medical treatment and drugs are available freely. Well, INSEAD is looking into this situation in conjunction with Johnson & Johnson, and they have come up with an idea that involves rats. Here to tell us more are INSEAD professor Loïc Sadoulet and Frank Welvaert, who is the head of corporate social responsibility at Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson is providing medical direction and some finance for this project. So thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, you've got the disease here. You have the treatment here. Where do the rats come in?
The rats can identify TB. They can smell it on the sputum samples. They can smell it on the slides, and they stop as when they smell TB and scratch, and therefore you can identify it. Tuberculosis had been almost eradicated, but the problem in Tanzania was that 80% of the population in Tanzania has latent TB, and the decline of immune systems due to malnutrition or to HIV/AIDS has led to a resurgence of tuberculosis cases. Tuberculosis, we say actually that TB patients, you can smell it on them. They smell like tar. And in fact, these rats, if we really wanted to push it a bit further, these rats wouldn't even have to go through the slides. A rat could actually be on your shoulder and smell TB.
So how does that actually work? I mean, you get people to spit and then the rats smell that, or what
That's
happens?
exactly right. So you come to the hospital, and just like you would do it normally, you would have a sputum sample and you would look at it under the microscope. Instead of putting it under the microscope, you put it under the rat. Where
do the rats come from, and whose idea was it to use them?
The rats are just normal bush rats that are available everywhere in Africa. It's a company or an organization, an NGO called Apopo, who was founded by a Belgian who had rats as a kid. And in fact, the first things that they found was rats had very acute smell, and they used these rats to detect landmines.
What is Johnson & Johnson's role in this?
Well, I think in a sense it was probably our own kind of internal corporate social responsibility kind of blue ocean that we're trying to explore in a sense, because I talked about unmet needs, but there is also the issue that is now high on the agenda. It's around affordability and access of drugs to populations, especially in emerging markets. So the question is, from a CSR perspective, how do you address that? And I think traditionally companies have been providing support to projects through NGOs, through other kind of partnerships. I think it is, however, if you look at impact, because that is what we should have, can we really demonstrate and measure the value that we are bringing and see what the impact is on people's lives? So to improve that, the question is, how do you do that? Is a grant or a philanthropic support the right approach to that? There may be other approaches. And I think with our team, the CSR team, we were very interested and probably curious to see what would happen if we apply the knowledge base and the competences of our people in the operating companies to a topic that is related to progress in mankind, I think in some of the emerging markets.
And in this case, Johnson & Johnson, by being a healthcare company, had the credibility to talk to the doctors, had the credibility to talk to the Minister of Health, had a certain validation, arrived with a certain validation of being in this field. And by being a private sector company, was able to talk to other private sector companies credibly. So for example, one company that we met there that has actually its whole CSR budget in Tanzania is on TB was Pepsi-Cola. And yet Pepsi-Cola suffered this legitimacy problem. So Pepsi-Cola suffered this legitimacy problem, saying, why would a soft drink company go into the health field? And yet through Johnson & Johnson, they were able to use their CSR budget to provide logistics for the sample collection and to roll out the solution. So Johnson & Johnson brought that unique capacity of being able to talk to the health sector and to talk to the private sector to build a new solution with this unusual partnership.
So now we have TB sufferers, and we have rats, and we have Pepsi-Cola, and we have the medicine. So can you give me the supply chain as to how that all works?
So one of the big advantages that rats can bring is that we actually can start using rats to proactively find cases. So we can take a TB sufferer and then go back to their household and collect samples from their household in order to detect who in the household has TB. Pepsi-Cola, by the fact that they deliver bottles and pick up bottles everywhere in Tanzania daily, can help us on the logistics, on collecting the sputum samples, on collecting the samples that we proactively go and get. They bring it back to the testing center, the Apopos testing center. Apopo is the organization that trains these rats, which then can communicate back the results through the Pepsi-Cola trucks going back out in their daily routine.
How did the MBAs get selected, and do you remember where they came from?
The MBAs got selected through a motivation letter and a series of interviews. We had MBAs we had an Iranian guy, we had an Indian woman who had been a union leader for United Airlines in the US, very critical skills once you deal with groups. So a range of 12 MBAs total, from a range of different backgrounds, from a range of different nationalities, and not necessarily from the medical field. The aspects for them was, the reason for bringing the MBAs in was to give an outside perspective, to ask the question of, well, why? Oh, because we've always done it that way, but why? And so that they were the kind of the people who were supposed to ask questions, the irresponsible questions, the irrelevant questions, to push the process forward.
So what else? What's the next step?
For this particular project, the next step is actually going and implementing some of the solutions. The board has decided, that the Corporate Citizens Trust Board of Johnson & Johnson has decided to push 4 out of the 6 projects forward. And so now it's actually getting to an implementation plan. I think we've had several requests by other partners to come in and say, could we design a similar experience? And I think it would be quite interesting to take a consortium of companies to actually look at problems around unmet needs holistically. We could take a healthcare company like Johnson & Johnson, an insurance company, a telecom provider. So I think that's going to be some of the next steps going forward.
Ultimately, I think we need to provide almost venture capital, social venture capital, that will enable people to set up their own structures and generate their own income so that they can make choices. I think ultimately in many of these emerging markets, these choices are around health, they are about education, housing. So how on earth can you make the choices how much you want to spend on each of them if you are not able to generate income yourself and you're dependent on what I would call a subsidized structure, whether it's through international development organizations or others. So let's look at these models. What are they? Social enterprise, social business, but bringing people into the system so that step by step over the longer term you can build, I would say, a new generation.
All right, I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.